Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Leslie with the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, and I'm proud to present Eric Spellman. He's going to be giving a webinar. Hi, Eric. He's going to be giving a webinar on the secret to selling ads on your website. Hot topic. We all want to learn about it, but I want to remind everyone that the New Mexico Small Business Development Center strongly encourages New Mexico small businesses to learn about the risks to their cybersecurity. I'm going to chat over a link throughout this webinar on our YouTube channel. That'll have some pre-recorded on-demand webinars, videos on cybersecurity, and Eric does a great one that you can pick up. Also, we also have Eric's webinars that you can watch at your leisure, and I'll make sure you guys get the link. If you have any questions, type them into the Q&A because he picks them up throughout the entire presentation. So don't be shy, and I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thank you, Leslie. And this topic is an exciting one, folks. I mean, I get asked this all the time. People say, you know what, Eric, I have all this information. It's great information. People love my information, but I'm not making any money off of this. And they say, is there any way I can make money off of this? I have lots of people who like what I'm doing, but there's no way for me to benefit from it. So that's what this one is about. It's about selling ads on your website. And it is one of the big ways that money moves around the internet. So if you're an expert at something, listen up, because this could definitely make you a few dollars. So when talking about selling ads, we need to ask 3 key questions. Okay. Number 1, do you even have the traffic? I mean, are you even doing something that people are interested in? You'd be surprised how many people have a great idea, but it's like crickets. Okay. Second, how will you be paid? How is that going to happen? What's going to cause you to be paid? And how are you going to measure it? Finally, what ads will you accept? Okay. We're going to talk about each one of these in depth. So get ready. It's time to talk about ads and how to sell them on your website. So first of all, do you have the traffic? I don't mean to burst your bubble, people, but it's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing to actually make money on it, okay? How big is your audience now? I mean, do you even know? You'd be surprised how many people, they come to me and they say, Eric, I want to sell ads on my site. What do I do? And I ask them, well, how much traffic are you getting now? And they don't know. They have no clue. They say, well, I get an email occasionally from people saying they like it. And I say, okay, but how many page views are you getting? How many people a day are going to your site? What's your most popular blog or video that you've done? And they have no way to tell me. Folks, don't get it. Don't put the cart before the horse. Okay. You got to have that horse driving traffic. You got to be seen as an expert before you can make money off of that expertise. So you got to figure out how big is your audience. How do you measure it? And we're going to cover each one of these in depth. You know, how are you going to measure it in a way that other people actually accept, that other people believe you? How do you prove it? You know, I could tell you that 1 million people go to my site every day, and that would be a lie. But how would you believe me other than my word? And how do you improve it? In other words, how do you get more people to your site? Because I'm telling you, the amount you can charge for ads is directly tied to how much traffic you have. So let's talk about how big is your audience. Like I said earlier, no one's going to advertise with you unless you have an audience. Okay. No one at all. You could feel that you know everything in the world and you love writing maybe. But if you don't have an audience, a provable audience, no one is going to pay for an ad. I mean, think about it. If I was going to advertise on your site, I would want to know how many people are going to see my ad. And if you don't know how to measure that, if you don't know how to give those numbers in a way that a business will respect and a business will understand and a business will be able to put a value on, then you're just wasting your time. You also got to realize, and I said this earlier, the bigger the audience, the more you make. You know, I've told y'all many times that my preferred social media is YouTube. I mean, my channel has gotten over 1.8 million views since I started. And I've gotten more business from that than all my other social media put together. And it has driven more people to my website than any other method I've ever used. But the key is, how did I get that big audience? One person at a time. I mean, I've got hundreds of videos out there, but do you think I even had an audience when I put my first video out there? Do you? Of course not. In the beginning, you're going to be starting from zero, and you're going to have to build on that, and you're going to have to proactively work on that. You also got to realize the reason numbers are so important is that less than 10% will click on those ads. Okay. And that's being positive. I'm giving you on that. Some people will even say that you should expect more like a 2% click through. 2%. In other words, if 100 people read your blog, your goal and your measure of success is if 2 out of that 100 clicked on that ad. So you got to have enough numbers to where when you do get the few clicks that will happen, those few clicks can actually equal up to some dollars. It's all about numbers. I'm telling you, people, this is a mathematics game, and it's all about the numbers. And if you don't understand the numbers, you will never make $1. You've got to look at the quality of the ad. And like I said, we're going to be talking about that. That's going to be one of the big things on whether people click on it or not. You know, is the ad good or is it cheesy? Is it stupid? Also, what is the quality of your audience? That's right. You know, a lot of times, if you attract the wrong kind of audience, they'll never click on anything. You got to have people who have money, people. I mean, can we talk? Your audience has to have some money that they can spend if you're really going to try to make money on these ads. And the more money that they have to spend, then the better you're going to do at this. So I tell people all the time, you got to target that audience. You got to go after that audience. You got to define that audience. And in other videos, I have sat down and told you how to figure out who your perfect customer is. And then you target them. You know, for me, my perfect audience is a business owner. That's who I'm going after. And so everything that I do from a promotional standpoint is to target them and their wants, their desires, their fears, everything. You've got to figure out who your audience is. And don't you dare say it's everybody. I will slap you. Don't you dare say that everybody is your customer or everybody is your audience. It is not. Your audience is a very specific group. And if you don't define them and you try to appeal to everybody, you will end up appealing to no one. So how do you measure? I mean, how do you measure these clicks or these views or whatever it is you're going to be measuring? What are these metrics? Well, let's start at the very beginning. When the internet was first created, it was all about hits. Y'all remember that? People were measuring hits. And in fact, some people even had a little hit odometer on their website. Do y'all remember that? Back in the day, when they would put number of hits and they would actually brag about that at the bottom of their website. It was ridiculous. Don't you ever, and by the way, you better not have that on your website, because all it will do is show how few people actually go to your website. Don't you ever do that. But it was all about hits, all about hits. Oh my gosh, I got 10,000 hits. Oh, everyone's bragging about hits. Let me tell you, hits are irrelevant. Hits are irrelevant. Hits are irrelevant. And that's because of what a hit actually is. You see, a hit, all it really means, if you needed a definition of it, is a file transfer. That's all. That's it. And what you need to realize is that a web page is made up of multiple files. Looking at one web page once will cause multiple files to be transferred from that server to your machine. Every picture is its own file. So to put it in better perspective, let's say that I had a picture or I had a website and a web page with 100 pictures of giraffes. Okay. Wonderful web page, beautiful pictures of giraffes, and there was 100 pictures of giraffes. Did you realize that every time one person looked at my giraffe page once, it was generating how many hits? 101. You're saying 101? That's right. 100 hits for the 100 pictures of giraffes, and then one hit for the page itself. Okay. So one person looking at that page once generated 101 hits. That's why it became irrelevant. That's why when people were bragging about hits, it didn't mean anything anymore. Page views are better. And that is a better way of measuring. How many page views have you had? In other words, how many people looked at this page today, this month, this year? That is going to be the better way of looking at it. Now, it still doesn't tell you if they scrolled all the way to the bottom and read every single word. It doesn't tell you that. It just tells you that that entire page with everything on it was delivered to that person. But it is much better than hits, truly much better. So like I said, if anyone starts bragging about you, they start telling you that it's all about the hits, just ignore them. Also, another good measure of whether people like your website or not is the time on the site. In other words, how much time did they spend on your website, your entire website? You can look at how much time they spent on the page, but you can also look at how much time they spent on your website. I mean, think about it. People who land on a web page and then leave within like 10 seconds, what use was that? It was a waste. They didn't even read anything. But people who landed on a web page and spent 3 minutes on that page and then went to another web page and spent 10 minutes on that page, you see what I'm saying? They're actually focusing on your content and they're looking at it. Those people would be considered a better quality customer. So not only are we looking at page views, you know, how many people actually looked at a page, but we're also looking at how long they spent on that page or how long they spent in total on the website. But you've heard this before, and I believe I actually had an entire topic dedicated to this. The most important statistic that will tell you whether people like your website or not, because I have people all the time, they say, Eric, is there one statistic that will tell me if people actually like what I'm doing? Yes, there is, and it's called the bounce rate. And if you don't know what the bounce rate is on every page of your website or even your website in general, if you don't know the bounce rate, then you better find out, because it is the #1 statistic on whether people actually like your website or not. So you're going, okay, Eric, what is the bounce rate? I haven't watched that video yet. The bounce rate is actually the number of people who land on a page and then leave. They don't click on anything else. They just leave. They bounce off. In other words, it's the page they leave from. Now, I tell people, you got to be careful, because the average bounce rate for most websites, when people ask me to go look at their website and say if they're doing it right or not, bounce rate is one of the first statistics I look at if they're even tracking that. And I'll be honest, on most bad websites, the bounce rate is upwards of 90%. 90%. I've even seen 99% bounce rate, which means 99% of the people, 99 out of 100 people who land on that web page don't click on anything. They leave. And if that's your bounce rate for your homepage, you got problems. That means there is nothing there that they want. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you really, I mean, before you start talking about selling ads to people, you need to figure out if people actually like what you're doing. And the bounce rate is one of the best ways. Your goal is to have the lowest bounce rate you can achieve. And I tell people, if you can get below 20% on a bounce rate, you're doing amazing. 20%. If you come up with good content, you should have no trouble. But if you see the bounce rate, especially on your homepage, especially, the first page of your website, If you see the bounce rate anywhere over 30%, you got work to do. And it either means that the website is so poorly designed that people hate it, or that your content's not even interesting. And like I said, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying that everything is measured. And on the internet, we measure everything. And what have I always said? And I've said it in half these videos. You cannot manage what you cannot measure. You cannot manage what you cannot measure. You can't just assume people like your stuff based on the occasional anecdotal compliment. You have to know, and the numbers will never lie to you. And also, don't depend on your webmaster or your web host to tell you whether your website's doing well. Of course, they're going to tell you it's amazing. Of course, the people who built your website are going to tell you that people love your website. They are biased. They are not objective at all. And so I would never, ever, ever, ever depend on the person in charge of my website to tell me whether people actually like my website. You need to use a third-party analytics program. And my favorite is Google Analytics. Now, this is something that you should have access to outside of them. If you're depending on your webmaster or your web host to just tell you how much traffic you're getting, that's not very smart. What you need to do is contact your webmaster and say, please install Google Analytics. You'll just Google Analytics and you'll set up an account and it will give you some code. You will then send that code to the webmaster and he will put it on every page of your website. And boom, you can then log in anytime you want and actually see the real stats you're actually getting. Okay, the real stats. I highly recommend it. And by the way, it's totally free. It's not like it costs you anything. Okay, so yeah, Google Analytics, highly recommend it. Anyone with a website needs to be using Google Analytics in my humble opinion. So how do you prove that you're getting the traffic you're claiming you get? And by the way, who are we proving it to? The people who want to buy ads on your site. You have to be able to prove to them, and they have to be able to believe that the numbers you're giving them are right. Because trust me, advertisers will question your numbers. They will. I mean, you may say, oh, we're getting 1 million people a day on my website. They're going to go, oh, really? Prove it. Well, I'm not the biggest fan of just sharing your analytics with people. Your Google Analytics, it's like showing too much of your cards, okay? But there are some ways to do it. You got to realize that whatever method you're going to use must be trusted by both parties. It's got to be accurate for you, and it's got to be accurate for them. And they must be able to check it without checking with you. It's kind of like how you look at Google Analytics. You need to be able to check it without going through your webmaster every single time. That's the same here. The people who advertise with you should be able to check the traffic on the pages where they're advertising to verify that what you're telling them is correct. It must be trusted by both parties. Like I said, you can give access to Google Analytics, but that's kind of it's kind of like a bottom feeder option. To me, it's giving too much information away. And you'll see me talk about some other services a little later that will help you understand the best way to do it. And it's going to be through trusted third-party software. Okay, trusted third-party software. Now, one of the ways they can do it is the person with the ad might actually host the ad on their website. So for instance, if the ad, most people don't realize a web page, the files that compose one web page can be located around the internet, even though it looks like one web page on your site. And so if the advertiser actually hosts their own ads, then they know how many times that ad was transferred. So that is one down and dirty, easy way for them to verify that your page is actually showing. is because they can look at how many times that ad was transferred, and they will trust that number. And that's without any third-party software. You've also got to realize one of the biggest problems out there, and one of the reasons there's a trust issue as it relates to a lot of this, are bots. Bots, that's short for robots. That's short for not real people, okay? A bot, sometimes, if someone is going to try to sell advertising, I'm not saying y'all will look like very honest people, but there are some dishonest people out there. And what they will do is they will program a few computers in their office to randomly go to their own website and view pages over and over and over again. It's not real people, it's fake people. It's a computer pulling up web pages over and over simply to generate page views, simply to generate banner ad views. These are called bots. And I would not recommend this at all. I would not. This is very illegal. This is very unethical. And it doesn't benefit anybody because bots don't buy anything. Okay? They may give you some numbers in the beginning, but when these advertisers realize they're not selling anything, or if they figure out, God forbid, if they figure out you're using bots to up your traffic, thereby upping your ad rates, you will lose all your reputation and you will go down hard. Okay. So I would never, it's kind of like those people who buy followers. You know, you can do that, right? You can go out there and buy Facebook friends. You can buy Instagram followers. You can buy page followers. I'm telling you, there are these people, these unethical people out there who have what we call follower farms with fake people in them. And when you pay them like $50, they'll send 10,000 followers to your page. And these 10,000 followers will never buy anything from you. Some people just want to do that simply so they can brag that they have so many followers. A lot of famous people ran into that and were called out for it because it is possible to figure it out. And by the way, listen to me, pay attention. If Google discovers that you're doing stuff like this, they will, your SEO, search engine optimization, your ability to show up when people do searches will totally go away. It will totally go away. Don't even play with that. It's fire and it will burn you every time. So how do you improve your traffic? So let's say you say, you know what, Eric, I do have some traffic, but you know, I just don't have a lot. Okay. So what do I do to improve it? How do I get more people to go look at my content? Well, I tell people all the time, and I've said this in multiple presentations, you need to understand the wagon wheel concept of traffic. Okay. Your website is the hub of a wagon wheel, like an old West wagon wheel on a carriage. Your website is the hub of that. All the spokes going into it are your channels of traffic. In other words, you might have one channel coming from YouTube sending traffic to your website. You might have one channel coming from Facebook, from Instagram, from an email newsletter, from you telling people in your store to go to your website. All these different forms of traffic are going to your website. Now, why do we send every one of these to our website? Because the website is the conversion point. The website is where you turn a shopper into a buyer, where you turn a window looker into an actual customer. And if you sell retail, it's where they're actually going to buy something and give their credit card and you make money. So the goal in most cases is to always get people back to your website. We're not trying to keep them on social media all the time. We want them to go to our website because the reason we want them to go to our website and not just hang out with us on Facebook all the time is because on our website, we control everything. Every message they get is from us. Whereas on social media, they're going to be getting ads from your competitors. They're going to be seeing and be distracted by other stuff. But if you can get them to your website, it's all you all the time. That's your goal. Get them to your website. And the more spokes you have coming into that, hub of your wagon wheel, the more traffic you're going to have automatically. You also need to know what your audience wants. And we've talked about this. You know, everyone makes a decision based on greed or fear. Okay. Everyone out there makes any decision on the planet based on greed or fear. They either want something they do not currently possess, or they want to know how to avoid pain. That's it. All marketing can be boiled down to those two things. And every buying decision people make is based on meeting one of those needs, either avoiding pain or gaining something they do not currently own. It kind of goes back to what I've been telling you before. No one wants what you sell. I know that sounds rude, but no one wants your product. No one wants your service. And you need to know that. You need to realize that no one truly wants what you sell. They want the value that it brings. Do you understand the difference? No one wants a shovel. They want a hole. Does that make sense? No one wants a treadmill. They want to be in better shape. You got to realize that your product is used to help them achieve what they actually want. And so the key to coming up with good content, the key to coming up with something on your website that people actually want, is to tie it to the value that your product brings, not your product itself. I'm telling you, it's the biggest mistake most people make, is they think talking about their product is what people want. No, they don't give a flying flip about your product. What they care about is the need that your product helps them meet. In other words, what do they want that they do not currently possess? Or what pain do they want to avoid? And you've got to figure out, based on your own products, what is your product doing for someone? And it could be doing both. And as long as you start speaking to that, you'll get the audience. Heck, that's what I did. That's what I did back when I built websites. I never talked about, my website building ability. I never made videos about that. It wasn't about that. I talked about how to pick someone to build your website. And that got me more traffic than anything. Talk about the value that you bring, not about your product itself. And like I said, it's about content, content, content. You got to keep adding content, people. If you want people going to your website all the time, you got to have content. You got to have content, and you got to keep adding to it. A website is not a little dead thing. A website is something that grows over time. Some of you had a website built a year ago and you haven't touched it since, and you wonder why you get no traffic. That's because Google visits your website. Did you know that? The little spider bots on Google visit your website and they say, has anything changed? Have they added anything? No? Okay, I'll come back next month. But if you go in and add a blog, add a video, add something new, add some products, the spider bots are going to go, oh, look, they did add something. Instead of coming back the next month, let's come back next week. Oh, look, they added more. Let's come back tomorrow. And guess what? Your rankings in Google are actually affected by this. You've got to keep adding content. You can't stop. A website is a breathing, living thing. It is not a billboard that you erect once and hope it directs people into your store. And I learned this with YouTube, it's all about the titles, people. It's all about using power words and understanding your titles. When people watch videos, they make their decision on whether to watch a video based on the title and the thumbnail, the little picture they see. The title really is the most important thing. And when people ask me, Eric, how much do you work on the different aspects of a video? I spend 60% of my time coming up with the title and the other 40% making the video. That's right. The title's the most important thing. You got to make a title that's exciting. And if you don't know how to do that, you're going to laugh when I tell you this. But if you don't know how to make a good title for all your social media posts and your blog titles and all that, if you don't know how to make a good title, the easiest way is your grocery store. When you check out at the grocery store, while you're waiting in line, there's usually some magazines and some periodicals and things like that. And so you might even see something like the National Enquirer or the Sun Times, the ones that have like, Bigfoot spotted kind of stuff. Now you may laugh at those, but I'm telling you right now, you need to look at the titles, because on the front, they create titles for the articles within. Because what's the sole point? What is the sole point of the titles on the front of, let's say, the Sun Times? It's to convince people to pick it up. It's to convince people to actually buy it. I'm telling you, there are people who get paid big bucks to come up with titles. That's it. Forget the story. The story may be stupid, but the title is what grabs people. You know, I tell people the most watched video I ever made, I give all the credit to the title, all the credit. And the title is this: the 5 online legal mistakes you've probably already made. The 5 online legal mistakes you've probably already made. Think about it. I'm basically implying people broke the law. I could have simply said legal stuff you need to know. That's not power. You need to learn how to construct titles, because I'm telling you, simply changing the title, going back through your old blogs, going back through your old stuff and simply changing the titles on them to something a little more exciting. Stay honest. I'm not saying bait and switch here. I'm not talking about clickbait where they're not getting what you promised, but be a little more exciting with it. Promise them something, tease them something. Use power words, and I have whole videos on that. In fact, I've already done one for y'all on power words and titles. So how will you be paid? Exactly how is that all going to work? Are you going to be paid by the view? In other words, are you going to be paid by the page view? You know, every time someone views a page that has their ad on it, are you going to charge a nickel? You're going to charge a penny? You're going to charge $1? What are you going to charge? Is it by the view? Or are you going to do it by the click? You know, you only charge if they get a click. And I'm going to be talking about each one of these. Or is it going to be by the sale? Now, that's the interesting one. In other words, you may get a piece of the pie. You may get a commission if someone goes to your website and then actually goes to your advertiser and buys something. Trust me, I've made money doing that one. And then how often will you be paid? We're going to talk about each one of those. So first, let's talk about getting paid by the view. What constitutes a view? Now, some advertisers are going to demand that a human being must actually see their ad. Now, if you put their ad at the very bottom of a long page, chances are no one's actually going to scroll that far to get to the ad. And so people who measure whether someone actually scrolled past their ad, they're going to notice that. What does a view constitute? Does a view constitute the entire page being viewed, or does it simply constitute that page coming up? You've got to figure that out. Was the ad even seen? You know, did people actually even see the ad? Was it so hidden well? Was it down the side? Was it at the bottom? Where was it? Getting paid by the view is going to probably be the smallest you get paid. Okay? This is going to be the smallest amount because it's the least valuable to your advertisers. You know, the customer didn't take any action on the advertiser at all. Your ad, their ad just happened to be on a page they were reading. And so usually the way you get paid on this is by 1,000 views. Okay. 1,000 views. So you may get paid maybe $5 per 1,000 views. And some people are fine with that. Some advertisers are fine with that because they're getting branded, whether they get clicked on or not, they're getting branded. And where people think about it, you know, they say that the average person must see something about 7 times before they might click on it. So I can see a value for it. But what I'm saying is you're going to get paid the least if you're going to be doing it by views. Some people actually do it fixed per month. I remember there was a nonprofit that I was doing business with. And the way they were going to help pay for their website was they had vendors. And these vendors would pay $300 a month each simply to have an ad on the front of this nonprofit's website. And this nonprofit website did have a lot of traffic. I mean, it was a very popular association kind of nonprofit. So it had tons of views by the people these advertisers were wanting to reach. And so when I say that this nonprofit was able to charge $300 a month for one banner ad, regardless of how many views they got, that also made it very easy for accounting because you didn't have to have any kind of technical knowledge. You didn't have to go in and measure, well, how many views were there, multiply that by this, and we'll come up with a dollar amount. You didn't have to do that. So if you already have a ton of traffic, you may just decide to kind of go look at that traffic and then kind of come up with an average, and then you don't have to do too much work at all. Now, more valuable than getting paid by the view is getting paid by the click. Now, what I mean by this is someone actually clicks on the ad. Okay. Now, before we were talking about views, how many times the page where the ad was located, how many times did that page come up? How many times was it viewed? But this is more valuable because in this case, someone actually clicked on the ad and went to the advertiser's website. It is way more valuable than views because you're actually getting them to the advertiser website. You will make a lot more money on this. But in order to get clicked on, the ad must be written very, very, very well because people know it's an ad. They know someone's going to try to sell them something. So the ad must be written in such a way that it still makes people want to click on it. Now, and we're going to talk about this a little later, but you've got to vet the destinations. You've got to check the quality of where it's going. I mean, you've built up this audience and you don't want to send them to something that doesn't represent you at all. You don't want to send them somewhere that's embarrassing. I tell people all the time, if you're going to be charging by the click, you need to vet, you need to research, you need to check out the people who are advertising on your site and make sure that they're legit, make sure that they're ethical. Because if someone has a bad experience on one of your advertisers' products, guess who's going to also get caught up in that? You. You also need to research click prices. Okay. What are clicks going for? And that's kind of tough. That's why I tell people use Google's ad click model. You've probably heard of Google, Google Ads. Okay. And Google Ads and actually Google AdSense is a way of actually putting ad. Hold on, let me turn off my phone. It's getting confused. Thinks I'm talking to Google. There we go. Okay. You can actually go in there and Google will tell you what kind of things ads are going for, what kind of prices. And it's by the click. And the click is based on the value of the click. Now, the way that Google does it is very simple. Let's say that you sell bicycles, okay? And so you find a website where there's a bicycle expert. And so this bicycle expert has Google Ads installed. And so he's making money from the ads because the way it works is if someone clicks on the ad on the bicycle site, the owner of the bicycle site gets a piece of it. Google gets a piece and the owner of the website gets a piece. And so you can make money doing that. I mean, that's how I make money with YouTube. I have enough views that when someone actually clicks on an ad when they're watching one of my videos, I get a piece of that. And so, yeah, it turns into a check every single month. It's the same thing with a website. And it's all based on traffic and it's all based on people clicking on those Google ads. And ads usually start at like 5 cents a click. That's the easy way to think about it. 5 cents a click. So if someone clicks on that ad, cha-ching, you get 5 cents. Now, the more popular that ad is, the higher per click it is. So for instance, if I sell bicycles, I might be paying Google 5 cents. But what if my competitor wants to come in and say, oh, I want an ad on that site too? My competitor says, hey, Google, I will spend 6 cents. You know, my competitor will spend 6 cents or 5 cents, but I'll spend 6 cents. And so it kind of becomes an auction. And as you get more and more competitors, the price per click goes higher and higher and higher. Okay. The most expensive click I've ever seen was $400 a click. And it was for a very specific kind of yacht. Okay. And yeah, that yacht company would happily pay $400 a click based on the amount they could make by someone buying a yacht from them. So that's what I'm saying. You got to think about how valuable that click is. You know, what kind of sale could they possibly get out of it? And so I always recommend look at Google's model because it can kind of help you, and it'll actually tell you what the cost per click is for a whole bunch of different kinds of searches. And I know a lot of people who use that to kind of come up with their own. You can also get paid by the sale. This is the most valuable to the advertiser because technically you're only going to get paid if someone actually buys a product, okay, which is what the advertiser wants in the first place. And this also means you're going to get paid the most. You're going to get paid the most for this kind because it's like getting a commission, if you will, or a finder's fee, if you will. Now, in order for this to work, you've got to know whether the sale actually got made. And you've got to be able to trust that because technically if someone clicks on an ad and goes to the advertiser's website, how are you going to know that they actually bought something? Like I said, this is where the trust comes into play. This is often called affiliate selling, and you can make a lot of money with this. It really is. I have. It's called affiliate selling. Amazon affiliates are the most popular and the easiest to do. If you ever want to experiment with ads, I recommend checking out either Google Ads or Amazon affiliates. So for instance, the way it would work for me was back in the distant day, I would read a book that I got on Amazon back when they were primarily booksellers. I would read a book and I thought, you know what? That's a great book. I'm going to recommend it to my customers on my email newsletter. So what I did was Amazon gave me a very special link for that book that only I had, a web link. And then in my email, I would say, folks, you better check this book out. And I would make that a link with my very, very, very special link that basically told Amazon that the link came from me, that the click came from me. And if someone actually went out and bought the book that I recommended, guess what? I got 10%. That's right. I remember one time when I was just kind of experimenting with this, I got $500 1 month by just simply recommending a book. If you're an expert and you recommend other people's products, you can make a lot of money by affiliate selling. Now be careful. If people think that you're only recommending a book in order to get paid by Amazon or somebody, then they're going to question your objectivity. But if it is truly something you would recommend to people, then you ought to at least get paid for it a little bit. And so it's called Amazon affiliates, and you can get paid up to 10%, whatever those people are spending. And it's not just 10% of that book. Amazon now has it to where if you recommend one item, but they go in and load up their cart, buy a whole bunch of stuff, you can get up to 10% of all of that. You can actually make some money doing this. And like I said, the way it works is you sign up and they give you a special link. And that's the link you use either on your website or in an email newsletter or on social media to where if someone clicks on that link, Amazon knows that it was you. So if those people actually buy something, Amazon gives you the kickback. Another one besides Amazon is called CJ. It used to be called Commission Junction. And this is another good one. It's one of the biggest ones out there. And it is special software that people trust that is a way to look at a bunch of different products out there, not just one sold by one company. Okay. So it's also an affiliate piece of software. And there's a variety of products from a variety of companies that you can choose, and you get a piece of that. How often will you be paid? It depends on the vendor. The vendors will usually come up with their own payment schedule. It can either be monthly or it could be based on a minimum amount. So for instance, YouTube will only pay you once you hit $100. So once the amount you've earned from YouTube hits $100, boom, then they cut you a check or they deposit money into your bank account. So if you're automatically meeting that minimum, then you'll get paid every month. And they can either transfer it directly or cut you a check and you receive a check in the mail. So what ads will you accept? How do you decide what ads to actually, we're going to talk about the standard sizes of ads because you need to understand that. Where they're going to be located on your website, how that affects their value. We're going to talk about the promises that are made by the ad, how you need to make sure that you stand behind them. And then we're going to talk about how to create a good ad 101. So what are the standard ad sizes? Well, first of all, a good ad graphic, the actual graphic itself, has got to be less than 150K in size. It should be no problem. Because think about it, if the ad is too big from a file size, it'll take too long to transfer. And so all ads have got to be less than 150K, okay, 150 kilobytes. And I know that gets a little technical, but when you're talking about file sizes, this is one of the big strong rules that must be out there. Now, the most common type of ad is called the banner ad. In other words, it's long, it's wide, and then a little short, and it goes across the top of the page. And it's usually 468 pixels by 60. And a pixel is like a little point, a little dot. You count things in dots. And so 468 pixels wide by 60 pixels tall. And that's called a banner ad. A half banner is, well, half that size. You could actually get two banners side by side doing that. And it's 234 pixels by 60 pixels. A skyscraper ad, and that's a very common name for it, is an ad that is more tall than wide. And it usually goes down the side of the page, okay? You'll see those down the side. And it's called a skyscraper ad, where it's more tall, in this case, 600 pixels, than wide, 120. There's also vertical banners, which you might think of as a kind of a smaller skyscraper. So in this case, the vertical banner is typically 120 by 240. It's all about location, people. You got to realize that every web page on your website is like real estate. It's all about location, location, location. And the most valuable piece of any web page is in the top left-hand corner. That's why you always put your logo there. And next to that is going to be just the top. And that's why people put banner ads there. And the further down you go, the less valuable it gets. Because why? The fewer people will actually scroll. You got to realize that the first screen full of information to come up is the most valuable part of any web page. But if it requires people to scroll to get to the bottom part, they may never get there. And so that's not quite as valuable. So banner ads at the bottom of a web page are the least valuable of all. You also got to realize there's another kind called the interstitial video ad. This is how YouTube works. Have you ever noticed when you're watching a YouTube video, sometimes it'll just interrupt and you'll see a little commercial. That's called an interstitial ad, which means in the middle of the video, an ad pops up and it plays. And you can sometimes skip it, sometimes you can't. And that's called an interstitial video ad. Pop-ups, usually on websites where you're reading something and then all of a sudden something will pop up and say, hey, check out this offer, blah, 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 blah. And it's just a pop-up. Pop-ups aren't as popular anymore because people get annoyed by them. And also a lot of software is out there that'll block them. Remember that the bottom will be the cheapest. The bottom of any web page will be the cheapest. So what about, we talked a tiny bit about this, vetting ad content and their promises. You got to realize that your audience is the most valuable thing you have because your audience is what generates money for you. You've got to protect them at all costs. You got to protect them from ad owners. You don't want to just let anyone advertise on your site. I remember one time there was a nonprofit and they said, Eric, we had this one guy call us and he's willing to pay us $100 a month if we'll put our ad on our site. And I said, who is it? And they showed me, and I went to the site, and it was scary. It was like, it was almost pornographic. And I said, you can't do that. You've got to realize that your audience will leave you if you put up bad ads that lead to bad vendors. You've got to ask yourself, are these ads complementary to what I do? So for instance, maybe you have a recipe website. Then what you ought to be selling is maybe cookbooks, cooking products, kitchen utensils, things like that. It needs to be complementary to what you do. You're not going to sell bicycles on a cooking site. So make sure that, but also you don't want it to be competitive. You don't want your competitors showing up in those ads either. Are they honest? I would almost recommend that you would click on an ad by one of these people trying to get on your web page. Click on one of their ads and actually buy it and see if it is as promised. Because like I said, if you let some shady vendor put an ad on your website and your audience starts having bad experiences with that vendor, it will directly affect you. And of course, there's always the bait and switch, where the ad promises one thing, but when they go to the website, they get the runaround, or they get less than what was promised, or not even what was promised. That's why I said, anyone who advertises with you, you probably ought to take the time to go and order their product and make sure it's something you would actually recommend to your clients. Because think about it, when it's on your website, you are recommending it. You're putting your seal of approval on it. You must verify. Click on these links and verify what your audience is about to see. So what is the easiest way to start when it's all said and done? First, you got to get that traffic, people. You got to get that traffic. Don't even consider putting ads on your website until you have traffic. Try an ad network, like CJ, Commission Junction, like Amazon, like Google Ads. Try one of them. Put them on your website. Measure the results. We talked about that. And each one of these networks will actually have kind of a control panel where you can measure those results. And then rinse, repeat over and over and over. I know a lot of people who are making tons and tons of money simply because people see them as an expert. And I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Any questions over anything we've gone over? Okay, Drew said, I don't mind seeing ads on a site that provides free information. I find it off-putting when I see an ad on a private business site that is selling a product or service. It does seem cheap. I agree with you. If you actually sell a product, do not advertise someone else's products as well. I'm not a fan of that. Ads work best when what you're giving away is information, because the law of reciprocation will usually state that you're giving people free information that's helping them. And so they understand that. And so when you offer an ad, they're more willing to actually click on it because you're not making money two ways. So yeah, very good point, Drew. Other questions?
While we're waiting for questions, I want to update everyone, as I always do, on what's coming up. So this week we have 3 steps to attracting and retaining customers. We have 2 bilingual sessions. One is transitioning to the normal, one is accessing financial resources. We have personal liability and how to separate it from your business. We have part 2 of a business plan, putting it in practice. We also have PPP, idle, and employee retention tax credits, tax implications. So if you got it, this is a good one. If 2020, 2021 taxes. And then Eric will be back next week. Who's stealing my art?
Yep. If you put pictures of your work or what you do, creative is visual, this is a way to make sure no one's stealing it, and how to check online to see if they are. So it's
So
a
I
fun
guess
one.
the first, and I know you're about to wrap up and give us your final words of wisdom, but so the first step, of course, from what I gather you said, is you can't You can't track what you can't measure, or you can't
Right.
even do this until you do that. Okay.
Exactly. You got to know what kind of traffic you're getting, because of the second you try to sell an advertiser on your website, they're going to say, well, how many people look at it? And you got to have an answer, and you got to have an answer that they will believe and can verify.
Okay,
Anything else?
that is the last call for questions. If we don't have any more questions, I want to remind everyone to visit our website, email me. I'll get you with a local counselor. If you have anything, bring it back to Eric next time, because we're lucky enough to have him for a little while longer. Also, I chatted over the YouTube link, so watch any of the presentations that he gives. And if you have questions, bring it in, because he's glad to answer it. So
Happy to.
with all that, of course you are, you always are, you answer and you know what, let me just say that they always have such great questions. So it's good that we have this expert in the field to help us with our small business. So thanks, everybody. You guys have a great rest of your week. See you later. Bye.